Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review and discussion. This one's going to be for volume 23, which is Unital Ring 2. So we've had to wait quite a bit for this just because we had volume 22, which was a short story collection in between volume 21 and 23. So we got, I think volume 21 in English was in like January, so right at the start of the year. It's nearly a year between releases here. I did have to go back and check what actually happened in part 1 just because, you know, there was a lot to wrap your head around with Unital Ring 1, the start of a new arc, and we're still in a sort of introductory phase here in volume 2, so it was actually quite easy to get back into, even though you know, I hadn't read volume 1 in quite a while. So for the most part, this video is going to be full spoilers. Just know from a non-spoiler perspective that again, it's another high quality book. There's no like drop in quality here in my opinion. Like I said, still early days, still introductory, in the sense that a large part of this book is actually what happened to Sinon when the event happened that switched things over to Unital Ring. So you get a lot of solo Sinon stuff here to establish her, and most of the book is about Sinon reuniting with the rest of the group. So the two, you know, Sinon on her own on one side, Kirito, Asuna, and the others on one side, coming together to reunite once again. That's the kind of core idea of the book. There's a few scenes in the real world where they do kind of catch up, because surprisingly it is actually easier for them to meet up in real life since the Unital Ring event happened, and so there's some cool stuff with that, because it's like a reversed situation from before, where typically you're trapped in the game and can meet each other in the game easily, but not the other way around. So it's quite interesting. Yeah, other than that, the main highlights of this volume are definitely the, I suppose, proper reintroduction of Argo here. She is great to see, and that they do some very interesting things with her character here that make her much more than just, hey, here's this character you remember, she's back now. They actually seem to have a bit of an arc for her that's very different than a lot of the other characters, so that's quite interesting. But yeah, we're going to jump straight into spoilers here to get into the in-depth discussion. And for the most part, I'm just kind of do my best to sort of recap what happens, cover the key points, and any of the kind of smaller points that are actually quite big or interesting. And I think we have to start off with where the book starts off, which is Sinon and what happened to her. So while in volume 1 we covered you know, Kirito and everyone being in ALO when the event happened, and the fall of Aincrad, the separation of the log cabin, and you can see from the map here the idea of, we covered the right side of this map in volume 1. Sinon, on the other hand, is in GGO when the event happens, and so spawns into Unital Ring over here on the left side of this map, near the Ornith Basin and so on, near the ruins. So you get the idea that they have to both, from either side, cross the savannah here and meet in at the Great Wall in the middle of the map, where there's a boss battle. So that's the kind of core of the in-game plot here. But I like the details here because, you know, they established that Sinon is hunting down materials to upgrade her sniper rifle when the event happens. She finds herself transported to a place she has no idea what's happening here. Again, they cover the whole idea of the grace period, and that you're allowed for the first couple of hours to have all your high level armor and equipment, but after that it's basically useless to you until you level up again and are able to re-equip it. So there's a cool stuff here. You know, she gets accused of player killing, even though what happens is that a group of players in front of her logs out and are attacked by monsters. She actually defends a few of the players who survive, but when they log back in, they just see dead bodies and Sinon there, and they're like, oh, you're a player killer, and that's what sort of separates Sinon from a lot of the kind of human players basically here. So she sort of is forced to kind of go off on her own and understand what's going on herself. She makes her way into the ruins basically, and effectively to find a peaceful place to log out, she gets on top of one of the big pillars, and before she logs out, she actually falls asleep in the game. So they do establish that like this is something that wouldn't happen in any of the other games, but in this game you can actually fall asleep. The system doesn't wake you up. So when she wakes up, the grace period has ended. So this is where she has to get rid of her high level equipment. She has to put the sniper rifle away, but she does hold on to it in her inventory. But this is where the player killing incident sort of comes back up. When she had gone over to kind of inspect the bodies of the players who were killed, she by mistake effectively just like walked over the items and kind of picked them up. So she ends up having like the equipment from a couple of players on her, and they happen to have a few lower level pieces of equipment. So she's able to equip some armor and have a gun, but it's not what she's used to. She's using an optical gun here instead. And pretty soon after this, she encounters her first kind of like, I suppose, proper piece of action in the Unital Ring. Killing the basic monsters at the start wasn't too much of a challenge, but here there's a giant sort of like field boss thing. It's like a giant mecha dinosaur monster that's attacking a group of people, she thinks. But when she gets closer to the situation, she realizes that it's this race of bird people called the Ornith. So she ends up helping them take down this giant mecha dinosaur thing, and they realize like it's a pretty high level boss, so the only way they're going to do this is that Sinon has to use her sniper rifle, her high level sniper rifle that she can't equip anymore. Now, they established that the way this is that it more or less the way the weapon works at this point is that she can't hold it, she's not strong enough to hold it. The basic problem with it is just that she can't aim it properly. She can still pull the trigger, fire the weapon. It's not locked out in that way. So she tries to communicate with them, of course, can't, but does enough to get the people that she's with to, you guys support the weight of this weapon and I'll fire it and finish it off. So she saves one of them, that earns some trust. The others kind of rush in, and then they finally kind of find a spot on target. Now it's a big event here. Like there's quite a few of the bird people involved here. They do just enough damage with their other weapons to kind of create an opening underneath some armor, and Sinon nails the shot. One shot with the sniper rifle just annihilates this thing. So this is how Sinon levels up from level 1 to level 16 immediately. This is the equivalent to the scene where Kirito uses all the wood to take out a high level monster in the first book. So this is how we're getting more on track to like, okay, by the end of the first 2-3 volumes we want the characters to be at inner around like level 15. This is how we quickly do it with Sinon. They have a whole sequence here where she is brought back to the Ornith kind of village, and she gets to know them a little bit more. We established that sort of speaking abilities is also something you can level up in this game. So she finds one Ornith who can speak English, and by just learning a few words of their language, she begins to level up her kind of Ornith speaking skill. So by the end of her stay there, she can more or less understand everything they're saying. There's a few words that are still kind of obscured to her that she can't really hear properly, but for the most part she can understand, and that's sort of the role that Sinon ends up taking up for a lot of this book, is that she has this speaking kind of skill and seems to be able to communicate with the locals better than anyone else. Yui does explain that she figured out that the language of the native people of Unital Ring it is Japanese, it's just like heavily obscured through layers of kind of filters that makes it unreadable, or like you can't understand it by default, and that this skill going up gradually unobscures that, and that's what's going on here. So it's not some completely extra language, it's just jumbled Japanese is the sort of the way it actually works. So she is given a musket by this people. She also gets loot, of course, from a pretty high level boss, though she isn't in the book. They don't really cover like how much of it is like super useful or not, but she has a certain amount of money that I suspect is probably going to be way more than we actually think it is at this point. But she has now a gun, and it's at this point she does log out, and this is where she kind of contacts the others and reveals that, like, hey, this has also happened to me. And the plan quickly forms for, we need to all meet up in the game. So Sinon realizes she has to go through the savannah and head to the Bashin base, basically. So that's the whole idea here, is like that they don't really know the map all that well, so all they can really tell her is that, like, we're not quite at the new Aincrad landing point, but the group of people known as the Bashin, we're near them. And so she's like, I'm near the Ornith, and so they sort of roughly figure out that they both need to go in towards the center of the savannah. Let's take a quick break from the in-game stuff to cover what's happening in the real world. So the big thing, cliffhanger ending from the previous book, is Argo is revealed to have joined the SAO Survivor School. So it's Argo's reintroduction as a character here, and our first time seeing her in real life as well. So she meets Kirito at the same time as Asuna is meeting this other new transfer student, Shikimi Kimura, who I'll cover in a minute, but we don't really learn all that much about. Argo actually gets quite a few scenes, like I said, and is super interesting. So we start off here with just a reunion here, and it's nice, it's happy. Kirito's so glad to see her again, that he's happy that she didn't die in the SAO incident. But it also comes up that, like, Argo and Kirito, like, got on quite well and were with each other for quite a bit of the game. Why have they never, either of them, never tried to kind of find each other? Now, the way it's written here, it's obviously more on Argo, that the lack of communication, why that is. Because obviously for Kirito to find Argo, all he had to go on was the name Argo. And now, while he had the inside track with Kikuoka and probably could have found her, the idea is that Argo, who is into MMO games like this, there's no way she could possibly have missed all of the mentions of Kirito. And she basically says that she knew the name Kirito was going around the place in GGO, ALO. She could have reached out at any time to contact him, but just didn't. And so they just sort of agreed to be like, okay, we both sort of were just weird about communicating with each other. But the big question, obviously, why are you only now joining the school? And we don't really get the full answer. Like, she's interrupted a few times trying to give the answer. The core details that kind of come out here are that, one, Argo writes for MMO Today, and that what she is doing at this point is basically going quite hard into investigating Unital Ring. And then there's also an implication that I think the timing of her joining the school at the same time as Shikimi Kimura is not like a coincidence. Now, they don't go too much into the other character who Asuna meets, other than to basically just say that Kimura was apparently the daughter of the founder of Kimura, the makers of the Ogma, and rival to RCT's Progress. So that's interesting. Like, the Ogma is obviously the ordinal scale device, the augmented reality thing. And I'm guessing that's going to just come into play a little bit more, because, like I say, we don't get to meet Kimura here. Like, we don't really cover any of her interaction with Asuna, other than Asuna just thinking about what happened on the way home from school that day. That she just considers that, like, oh, Kimura is kind of like me. Like, she was going to the school I was going to go to before the SAO incident happened, and she's kind of almost feeling like, wow, this is the life I almost like could have had if not for what happened. And she kind of feels a little bit almost like inferior for some reason to Kimura, which is, it makes it a kind of a weird kind of dynamic here, because we obviously didn't see the way they interacted with each other all that much, outside of, I think, just that Kimura came up to Asuna like she knew her. So obviously something about her personality like got through and like affected Asuna in some way. Now Asuna realizes that, like, no, she's super happy with the way things have turned out. She has so many friends, Kirito, and her life is perfect as far as she's concerned. But something about this meeting with Kimura has affected her in some way. Now, they don't go into it more than that, other than the like 2-3 pages where it's directly addressed. And then Asuna getting the sense that the reason Kimura is here is basically because the school has become somewhat like notable or kind of famous to a degree since the SAO incident, and that people from who aren't SAO survivors are joining the school just to be a part of that sort of like almost notoriety, and that she's super successful and can go to any school she wants. She's going to be going to study abroad, but she's coming here to just have like an interesting final semester almost. So there's obviously more than meets the eye here. We'll go into her, I suppose, in the future volumes, but that's really all they say here. But yeah, Argo meeting Kirito, and then Asuna comes out because she was going to meet Kirito and is super surprised, but happy surprised to see Argo again, because they were also very close if you've read Progressive. So they have a really nice reunion. It's one of the really kind of nice moments. It's one of the color pages from the start of the book as well. But yeah, we get Argo's real name, which is Tomo Hosoka. So that's nice to know. They also have to introduce her to like Liz and Silica and so on. So you get that fun dynamic. There's a funny scene where right before he introduces her to Liz and Silica, he's like, don't say anything weird in front of them. And she's just like, what do you mean weird? But then when she introduces herself to them, she's like, hi, I'm Argo, Tomo Hosoka. I'm Kirito's special friend from Sword Art Online. And they're all like, what? Special friend? What does that mean? But she's obviously just sort of like joking with them. So, it just highlights the idea they're going to get on, I guess. There's even a fun kind of little image page where they just have like the two of them looking at her, and her just kind of like being like big sister type thing. So I'm guessing that's part of the dynamic that they're going to go for. So yeah, beyond that, with Argo, they just established that she is not going to jump into the game straight away. That through her conversation with Kirito, they sort of established that no, she doesn't regularly play ALO, GGO, or any of the games. She dives in occasionally, but then deletes the account, because her role as a writer for MMO Today means that she just has to keep up to date. But she knows where the information can be found, so she doesn't feel the need to play that often. She sort of establishes that it's not out of any sense of like fear or anything like that for going back in. She's actually intrigued at the idea that she could like reactivate her SAO account and have like that info back whenever she wants, which I assume will happen. But right now she's set. They're more setting her up to be a character who's more of the information broker in the real world, to help everyone during this event. So, but towards the end, after the big fight scene happens and they log out, Argo does say that she would like to check out the location and what's going on, to confirm some information, as long as she gets sort of a guarded like tour of the place. So that might lead to her playing more and more, officially becoming part of the group. But I think we're still waiting to see what her real sort of motivation is in all of this, because the big thing is her last scene in the book, and the kind of cliffhanger ending here, is that she actually goes with Kirito, who's going to meet Kikuoka. And she goes just to see what's going on. She's interested. She's kind of heard rumors about this guy and his involvement. And for her as a reporter, meeting Kikuoka will be interesting. So it's fine and all. And he's like, oh, who's this girl that you brought along with you this time, Kirito? And then she's just like, I know who you are. And she's basically like, how's it going, Chrisite, which is his avatar name from ALO, which he plays. That's his username. And so she knows him as his ALO avatar. But she establishes earlier on in the book that she doesn't play ALO necessarily herself. So what's going on here? How does she know? There's more than meets the eye going on here. And Kirito is actually the one out of the loop in the middle of all of this. So I'm guessing at the start of the next volume, they will go into detail on this in terms of explaining what's going on with Argo. But I thought it was a cool cliffhanger to establish that, wait, Argo and Kikuoka know each other somehow? How? What? Why? And so on. So there's that. Which leaves us with the kind of last section of the book, which is Kirito and everyone else and the log cabin and what's going on there. So again, we get back into more of the dynamics from the first book, where we go heavily into the idea of crafting, survival. We need to find a way to defend this area well. We need to have the tamed animals that we have on guard duty. We need to create walls so the place is protected. Because of the fight that happened in the first book, they want to avoid that again if possible. So they come up with a list of things that they need to do, and that includes making the walls, gathering the materials for that. Kirito and then Alice, I think, has a sword. That's some of the only forged equipment they have, so they need armor for everyone else as well. But they have Liz and her blacksmithing, so they can do that. So that's all great, and they just come up with this list. And a large part of that section of the book is kind of discussing this stuff. The action happens once we realize that, okay, we need to meet up with Sinon in the game. So they have to go on a bit of an expedition. So I think what happens here is that they ultimately decide that Asuna, Silica, and Alice stay behind to guard the log cabin. And then the rest of the group heads out across the savannah. So that's why you have Kirito, Yui, and Lisbeth and so on going with them. Now, there's a few interesting things that sort of happen along the way here. One is that there's rumors of an ice storm might happen on the savannah, which is a really weird thing to happen, but it does happen. So they have to deal with the sort of frost or freeze debuff that's affecting their health. Kirito ends up taming a panther basically along the way. They think they're going to have to fight it, but Kirito, in a last-ditch attempt while they're freezing in a cave, does manage to tame this panther and names it was it Kuro, I think. So that means Asuna's tamed one animal, Kirito's tamed one, and then towards the end of the book, Silica tames a bear as well. So there's a growing list of tamed animals that they all have. But they also set up the idea that one of the things they really need is an easy access to iron to really get the smithing stuff going, which they can only get out of the cave that the boss bear is in from the first book. So they want Silica to tame that bear to free it up from that cave. There's a few little things that happen here, like they established that, they all expect Silica's top skill that has kept over at a high level to be beast taming. But she reveals, actually, it's daggers. And they're like, okay, that's fine, that makes sense. But then later on in the book, when you get the sudden appearance of Klein and Egil, who kind of reveal their own kind of little story, that because they're working, they're a day behind in starting the game, and so they have their own little incident that happened when they started off. But they were with each other together. They managed to just use their amazing teamwork to take out a group of players who are a little bit more established and take their gear. And the reason that they were able to catch up with the group, despite having no contact with them up to this point in the game, is that there's the surprise reveal with Klein that his top skill is not katana that was transferred over, but actually pursuit. So basically kind of tracking, I suppose. And everyone's like, what? Klein, why on earth is your pursuit level that high? You're the katana guy. Explain this. And he's like, well, the quest that Skuld sent us on in ALO, and we got that item. I've been continuing that quest, and the quest requires me to use this pursuit skill quite heavily. And so you get the idea that he is so obsessed with Skuld and completing this quest that he's maxed out a second skill in ALO, which I suppose shows his devotion to that quest. Now, they established that he was just about to finish it before the Unital Ring incident happened. So it's this interesting thing, but it's kind of so we don't get to find out much information about it. I'm guessing that quest might get incorporated into Unital Ring in some way, and we'll find out about it later. But it means that Klein is in a bit of an interesting position where like his skill set is a bit kind of mixed. He's obviously still a top level player at the game, and even though he's missing his top skill, I suppose, he'll find a katana at some point and he'll train up that skill, and it'll get back to normal. So, you know, they meet up with them sort of along the way, which is cool. And they eventually do get to the wall in the middle. And this is where we get the big sort of boss fight of the book, which is actually against this sort of giant frog boss monster in the middle of the wall, in this sort of like area that has water and stuff like that. And they initially think that Sinon is being attacked by creatures when they find her in the wall. But she's actually met this other race of natives called... They end up being called the Patter or Pattern. I forget the exact name of them. But basically they're mouse creatures. So kind of sentient mouse creatures. They're small, but they have weapons. They have a society. And so they realize, oh no, we're actually allied with them. So we end up with this pretty cool boss fight where this crazy giant frog starts hopping around the place, and they have to defeat this to get out. So it's like Sinon, Kirito, you know, Lifa's there, Yui. During this fight is when Klein and Egil join the group. That's when they find them. So it's quite a few characters, but also the mouse creatures play a role in the fight as well. The fight it's not the best boss fight ever, but it's pretty cool just because they're all not used to how to fight in this world, and like how exactly, you know, what skills they have, what skills they should use, and they have to use everyone. And again, they establish the idea that, again, remember, Yui is a player in this game, that she has hit points, and while she still has sort of her AI knowledge bank, beyond that, her skills are the same as anyone else. She's been training with Alice to become a better swordswoman, and that comes into play in the fight, because they realize that they're not doing too much damage to this the frog, because its sort of outer skin along its back and stuff like that, where they'd usually hit, is pretty thick, and so they're not doing a lot of damage. That, like frog monsters in the other games, they need to flip it onto its back and attack its sort of belly, basically. So they managed to do that a little bit with the help from the kind of pattern. They do quite a bit of damage. But when they get past about, 30 health or something like that, it's down to 30% of its health, it starts to activate this power, which is basically it can fire fire out of its mouth. And this nearly results in a few of the characters being killed. So they engineered this situation where... Kirito's like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop in, I'm going to do this really cool like jumping sword skill attack that will distract it and hopefully give you guys the chance to sort of flip it over. But Yui's like, no, I need to do that. You need to be, as like the highest damage dealer on the field here, Kirito, you need to be the one to actually deliver a blow to it when it's on its back. Otherwise, we just won't be able to deal enough damage. So Kirito is put in this interesting situation where he kind of gets to sort of be the sort of worried father figure in a way, where he knows Yui is skilled, she's being trained in the right way, but he is worried about her being put in these kind of crazy situations. And so she gets a huge moment to prove herself, where she gets to do this kind of running leap over the monster, executing like a leaping, I think, vertical attack, and that puts her in risk because she then falls, you know, from a height after executing it. She is saved by the arrival of Klein, is the one who grabs her, but she executes it well, and the others are able to eventually finish off the monster. Cool moment, like right as it's about to die, like it's about to let off this fire attack, and you get this cool moment where the way that it does the fire attack is that there's like a magical ring appears from its mouth and it's about to fire. You know, Sinon just sticks her hand through the magical ring and just fires directly into its mouth to do the last bit of health. Then they reveal how you get magic in this game, which I thought was a pretty cool reveal. Kirito gets the item drop, this sort of fire crystal, and he looks into it and is like, oh, like it basically says, eat this crystal and you'll learn the fire spell. And he had said earlier on in the book that it would be cool if he could learn the fire spell. So I'm kind of like, oh, are they going to go down a slightly different road in this game and give Kirito magic as well, kind of like Alicization? But no, he hands it straight to Yui, so she can do it, because they had a chapter earlier on where they went over how they all sort of assigned their skills and stats. And even though Yui was training to be like a swordswoman from Alice, when she assigned her stats, she actually went more into the kind of sage mage road, and Kirito's a little bit kind of confused. But she went down that road because she wants to be more like Asuna, her mother, than Kirito. She wants to sort of be the berserk healer style. So that's why Kirito gives her the fire thing. So she eats it. She gains the fire attack. The initial one she has is fire arrow, which she ends up using quite well. So I guess as we go forward, Yui will be more of a magic user from distance, but she knows sword skills to keep herself alive up close as well. Because there's a lot of stuff whenever an action happens, like Kirito's always make sure to either have one of the others in the party or his new panther tamed animal guard Yui just to make sure she's safe. So there's that. And then the interesting thing is, like, they win this big boss fight and they make their way back to the log cabin. But as they're on the outskirts, they realize the log cabin's being attacked. And it's this group of basically sort of player killers, similar to the attack that happened in the first book. And Kirito sort of figures out that, like, oh, it must be the same people, just like he's got different people coming after us this time. So again, this is where Kirito brings up the idea of, like, you know, this guy, Sensei, I think is what the guy in the previous book mentioned. He's organizing things from the shadows and targeting us for some reason. We don't know why. So the attack, they all joined the battle. Obviously, Asuna, Silica, and Alice had been defending the cabin, but now like 10 other characters join. Plus, they have not just a few mouse warriors, but like they have a whole like village, like 20 of these mouse characters as well. So they all join the battle. So it's a pretty big battle here at the log cabin. Kirito comes in, takes out a guy. Yui takes out one guy with her fire arrow attack, and they eventually manage to take out the leader of the group, and, you know, eventually sort of win the day ultimately. But right as he was about to kill the leader, the guy who is revealed to be sort of relatively high up in the salamanders, I think. Kirito doesn't know him as such, but sort of knows that this is a kind of high level player who knows Kirito. Who is a guy who could get this many hardcore players to just at will listen to what he's saying? What's going on here? And then there's a tease of, as well, his like final words as he dies. Obviously, it just means he can't log back into the Unital Ring. It doesn't mean he's like dead for good. But he says something along the lines of, like, Kirito, like, are you, or something like that. And Kirito's like really taken aback by this because he doesn't know what to make of it. Like, what on earth was this guy trying to say? Why is Kirito sort of so out of the loop on kind of what's going on here? Very, very interesting dynamic for sure. That they're suddenly introducing, like, right at the end of the book. I thought it was a little bit like teasy, just because it's like, what possibly could he have been saying? Because he seemed like almost shocked as he said it. He's like, Kirito, are you like he knows something about Kirito that Kirito doesn't know about himself? Interesting. But yeah, they end up fending that off and realize that, okay, they need to go pretty crazy with the defense on the log cabin to avoid this happening again. And they make the decision. Kirito makes the decision then and there. We're not just going to create like bigger walls and stuff like that. We're going to turn this into a town. Part of the reason we're being attacked is because it's one log cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and people think they can attack it because it's just one thing. If we turn this into a town and create houses for the mouse people, and have other houses that you guys can live in or whatever, and create a big sort of fortification and have it be its own town, people will think twice before attacking, because it is a town. It's now no longer just one place you could attack. It's a place you can go to, and it'll alter the way people sort of perceive the location. And so they kind of established that, like, yeah, they get this done in a few hours because they have so many people now, and they have enough sort of skills at this point where they can do a lot of this stuff themselves. So that's for the most part where we leave that idea of the story. Is just that, okay, most of the group is back together now. Like, we have Klein, Egil, and Sinon back with the group. Argo, I suppose, is going to come into the game at some point. We don't know if she'll be a regular party member, but the idea is that, yeah, the band is pretty much back together here. They have now a properly fortified position that's actually in a very good position, because, as they explain, the reason they can make the town so quickly is because they've got unlimited wood, they've got easy access to water, iron is right nearby, no problem whatsoever. One moment I forgot to mention earlier on in the book is that part of the reason why the group was able to be so successful here is because Kirito actually sacrificed his black sword to give up. Like, he basically tells Elizabeth, smelt this down into its materials, use that materials to make everyone armor and equipment. So his famous black sword, that's part of his dual set with Excalibur, he gives the black sword away. They get a lot of materials, and this is what leads to, you know, Alice having armor, Yui having armor, them all having equipment, and so on. So an interesting sacrifice that was definitely needed, but he makes sure, and they all make sure to realize that they're all going to keep hold of their, like, most popular their favorite weapon. He's not going to do the same thing with Excalibur. So that's kind of cool when he's finally leveled up enough to be able to use Excalibur, whenever that is, because in the grand scheme of things we haven't really ever seen him use it that much. So I'd like to see it get some use in this arc at some point. Other than that, you know, they come out of this is when the book sort of really ends, when he goes to see Kikuoka. And yeah, it's just one of those interesting books where, like, I enjoyed it start to finish. I like the sort of progressive style focus on, like, game mechanics. That's nice to see once again. I would have appreciated a little bit more sort of progress, in that it was a little bit kind of repetitive with the first book, in that another attack on the log cabin, the fact that, like, we had to have, you know, a bunch of other characters explain, like, here's what happened to me on the day Unital Ring happened, which was fine, I think, for Sinon, but then, like, a little bit of a recap on Egil and Klein's story. We're still very much in that introductory phase of the arc, where they're not going to reveal what's going on here. Why did this happen in the first place? What's the deal with the whole phrase that was said to all the characters about, like, find the heavenly light, and, like, if you survive with your one life, you'll get everything that you want, or whatever. The overall sort of quest of this game, what's it about? They don't really go into that. They just sort of all establish that, like, they've got so much to do in this game that the main thing, get to the heavenly light, or that area, that's the last thing on their minds at this point, as they're just trying to get going. So that's interesting. I do like the intrigue that is beginning to build, as, like, Argo is the one who almost seems to be on the case in the real world about why this is happening in the first place. And I like the concept that, like, Kawahara basically says it in the afterword, in the book, that next volume we're going to go back to the underworld, which is really, really fascinating to me that we can do this. We're so used to these arcs being like, this is the game that is the focus of this arc. The idea that, oh yeah, we're not locked into Unital Ring. Sure, we have to be careful about when we leave it, but they have a fortified position now. They can spend as much time in the real world as they want, realistically. There's no time frame on this arc established just yet. So the idea that, yeah, we can just go into Underworld is completely a possibility. How it all links together, I'm not entirely sure, but I like that we can do that and that we're not just forgetting about what happened in the previous arc, with like Alice being the only real kind of signifier of that. I like that there are moments where we get the idea that, like, you know, Kirito does mention Yu-Gi-Oh every so often and acknowledges that you know, it's a kind of it's a that he still misses Yu-Gi-Oh. It still affects him, and so those moments where he thinks about a fun thing with Yu-Gi-Oh but then remembers, like, oh, but he's gone. um that's gonna be interesting, especially because, like, we know they went back into the underworld, like the last moment effectively of the previous arc. um what are we going to do when we go back in, because so much time has passed because of the time acceleration that it's the descendants of all the characters that we know rather than the characters that we know. So I'm wondering what role exactly all of this plays. I'm guessing it's going to play into some of the Fluctlight stuff, and again, the overall arcing theme of Sword Art Online, of the technology and how it can help things and advance things, and especially with what the Seed was ultimately all about. The idea that this all results in all the games becoming one, you can sort of see how it begins to come together with a little bit of the kind of politics outside from different technology companies. Is kind of interesting. Again, I think Kayaba probably has to come back into things at some point to explain the whole what's going on, but I like that there's that mystery in the final arc of, like, why did we do all this stuff? What's it all about in the end? Because Alice and the result of the first arc of Alicization was fantastic. That ultimately all of this so far has led to the creation of true artificial life. Now what? Are we just going to, like, accelerate that and have more Alice's or something like that? Who knows? But yeah, exciting stuff. Volume 23. I think there's a bit of a wait until volume 24. I don't think it's... Usually there's, like, what, 4 months between books. I haven't looked it up yet, but I'm excited for 24, definitely, because it seems like it's going to be a bit different again. But yeah, it seems like another long arc. I don't know how many volumes it's going to be, but we're going to be here for quite a while. So that has been the video. In the comments, if you have any questions about this book, leave them below. Or if you've read the book yourselves and what are your thoughts on it, definitely also tell me that. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.